Breaking news tonight. Washington is officially moving forward with investigations into fresh mushroom imports from Canada, and the implications go far beyond produce aisles and pizza toppings. When the U.S. government starts using phrases like materially injured and less than fair value, this is no longer just a routine trade dispute. It is the opening act of potential tariffs, retaliation, and another supply chain shock that American consumers did not ask for. The key question now is whether this is legitimate enforcement of trade rules or another policy overreaction that drives prices up and trust down. This story matters because it comes at a moment when the U.S. economy remains highly sensitive to food price volatility. Any disruption, even in a seemingly small agricultural product, can ripple quickly through grocery stores, restaurants, and household budgets. What looks like a technical trade case on paper can translate into real-world costs for millions of Americans. Here is what just happened in plain terms. On January 15, 2026, the U.S. International Trade Commission, known as the USITC, voted that there is a reasonable indication that a U.S. industry is being materially injured by fresh mushrooms imported from Canada. Those imports are alleged to be dumped, meaning sold at less than fair value, and allegedly subsidized by the Canadian government. Three commissioners, Chair Amy A. Carpel, David S. Johansen, and Jason E. Kearns, voted in favor of that finding. That vote matters because it keeps the case alive and pushes it into the next stage of investigation. With that decision, the U.S. Department of Commerce continues its role in the process. Commerce had already initiated anti-dumping and countervailing duty investigations earlier, on January 6, 2026. The complaints were filed by petitioners organized under the Fresh Mushrooms Fair Trade Coalition, representing U.S. growers tied to locations such as Blandon, Avondale, and West Grove in Pennsylvania, as well as Lincoln University, Pennsylvania, and Miami, Oklahoma. Behind the policy language is a very human story. Picture a family-owned diner near Pennsylvania's mushroom-growing region, operating on thin margins. Mushrooms are used in omelets, burgers, gravies, soups, and pasta dishes. If prices rise due to duties or supply disruptions, menus change, costs increase, and customers feel it immediately. Small price increases may seem minor, but they add up fast at the checkout counter. Canada, however, is pushing back strongly. Mushrooms Canada says it is disappointed by the decision, but confident that the final outcome will show compliance with rules-based trade. Its CEO, Ryan Clagg, has called the allegations unfounded and argues that Canadian mushroom producers support rather than harm the broader North American market. That sets up a direct clash of narratives over who is actually being injured and why. To understand why this matters, it helps to understand how the U.S. trade enforcement system works. This is not a random political move. The system operates on two parallel tracks. The Department of Commerce determines whether dumping or subsidization is occurring and calculates potential duty rates. Separately, the USITC determines whether the domestic industry is being materially injured. Right now, the USITC has only issued a preliminary injury determination, not a final verdict. It simply means there is enough evidence to keep the investigation moving forward. The timeline from here is critical. If the case continues, Commerce is scheduled to issue a preliminary countervailing duty determination on February 18, 2026, followed by a preliminary anti-dumping determination on May 4, 2026, with possible extensions. Meanwhile, the USITC's public report, titled Fresh Mushrooms from Canada and listed as Publication 5695, is expected to be released by February 19, 2026. That report will detail the Commission's analysis and the evidence gathered so far. Dumping, in simple terms, means selling goods in the U.S. market at prices considered unfair, often below home market prices or production costs. Countervailing duties are meant to offset government subsidies that allegedly give foreign producers an unfair advantage. Material injury is not a vague concept. It is meant to reflect measurable harm such as lost sales, declining profits, reduced capacity use, and downward pressure on prices. One way to think about this is through a simple analogy. Imagine two bakeries in the same neighborhood. If one bakery can sell bread below the cost of flour because someone else is covering part of the expense, customers naturally shift there. The other bakery loses sales, cuts workers, or closes altogether. That is the core claim U.S. petitioners are making here, whether it is ultimately proven or not. What should raise concern is that trade cases like this rarely stay limited. Once tariffs become a possibility, incentives change across the market. Producers lobby harder, importers hedge their exposure, retailers renegotiate contracts, and politicians frame the issue as job protection. Uncertainty itself becomes a hidden cost. Even before any duties are imposed, companies may pull back on orders, shift suppliers, or stockpile inventory, creating price distortions. This case also follows a familiar bureaucratic pattern. Commerce notes that additional case details, including the scope of the investigation and alleged subsidy programs, are logged under formal case numbers within its system. That signals a process that can expand, rather than contract, once it gains momentum. History suggests why this matters. The U.S. has long used anti-dumping and countervailing duty actions as both enforcement tools and political pressure valves. Analysts warn that even a narrow agricultural case can set a precedent. Once one product is targeted, others often follow, as industries seek relief through enforcement instead of competition or innovation. Mushrooms are not a luxury product. They are an everyday ingredient in American homes, restaurants, and food manufacturing. Small disruptions can ripple quickly through supply chains. Mushrooms Canada argues that its industry is built on cross-border collaboration and that the U.S. and Canadian economies are deeply interconnected, meaning enforcement actions do not happen in isolation. If this investigation escalates into duties or long-term supply disruption, the impact will be felt unevenly. U.S. growers and packers argue they are being harmed and deserve protection. If they are correct, duties could stabilize prices and protect jobs in growing regions. But if the remedy overshoots, consumers pay the price through higher food costs. Families on tight budgets would feel it first. Mushrooms are common in low-cost meals like pasta sauces, casseroles, and breakfast skillets. A small increase multiplied across millions of shopping carts becomes a real cost of living pressure. Restaurant workers may also feel the impact as higher input costs lead to higher menu prices, smaller portions, or reduced hours. Uncertainty alone can cause disruption. If importers fear retroactive duties, they may reduce shipments early, tightening supply before any official penalty is imposed. Large grocery chains and food distributors are highly sensitive to price stability. When duties are imposed, prices are often adjusted quickly, squeezing producers and smaller businesses caught in the middle. This is not happening in isolation. Commerce currently maintains hundreds of active anti-dumping and countervailing duty orders across industries. International partners watch these signals closely. Canada, as a deeply integrated trade partner, is already pushing back publicly, emphasizing quality production and cross-border dependence. Analysts warn of two risks: retaliation in other sectors and a broader precedent that encourages more trade disputes. As the next 30 to 90 days unfold, expect lobbying to intensify, media messaging to escalate, and buyer behavior to shift as companies prepare for the possibility of preliminary duties. In the medium term, this could result in a duty regime that locks in higher prices or a collapse of the case under scrutiny, though not before uncertainty has already taken its toll. The takeaway is simple. When trade policy becomes a blunt instrument, ordinary people often pay first. The smallest products can sometimes expose the biggest policy failures. If you want to stay informed on stories the mainstream media rarely breaks down fully, make sure you're subscribed, like the video, and turn on notifications for fast updates.